It was one of those quiet mornings in the courthouse, the kind where you could hear the ticking of the big clock above the courtroom doors and the soft shuffle of legal papers being passed around. Judge Monique Harris sat at the bench, calm and composed as always, dressed in her black robe, her hands folded neatly in front of her. To everyone else in the room, it was just another trial, another defendant, another list of charges. But to Monique, this day was about to bring back memories she had buried deep in her heart. Monique had worked hard to get where she was. The first black female judge in her district, known for being firm but fair. She carried the weight of her position with grace and strength. Her courtroom was a place of justice, never drama. That's why, when the next case was called and the young man in handcuffs was led in, the air shifted. Just slightly, enough for Monique to look up and freeze. He was older now, face leaner, eyes tired. But she knew that face. She had known it since she was 12. That was Deshawn, her first friend, her childhood crush. The boy who used to walk her home after school, holding her books and laughing at her silly jokes. The boy who defended her when others didn't. The boy who suddenly disappeared from her life one summer without explanation. And now, here he was, standing before her as a criminal defendant. The courtroom didn't know the history. No one could have guessed what was rushing through Judge Harris's mind. But for Monique, everything blurred for a second. The polished courtroom, the lawyers, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. It all faded into the background. All she could see was the scared, cuffed man in front of her, and the memory of the boy she once knew. She cleared her throat and looked down at the file in front of her. Charges: theft, resisting arrest, possession. It didn't make sense. Deshawn had been smart, kind, full of potential. What had happened to him? Where had he been all these years? But before she could get her thoughts in order, another story was quietly unfolding across town. On a packed city bus during rush hour, a group of tired commuters leaned on the poles and handles, lost in their own worlds. Among them, a 17-year-old boy named Marcus sat near the back. Tall, polite, soft-spoken. He wore his school jacket and headphones, the kind of kid who didn't say much but always noticed everything. When a pregnant white woman stepped onto the bus, struggling to balance herself, nobody moved. She looked around awkwardly, her belly making it hard to stand steadily. Without hesitation, Marcus stood and offered his seat. Their eyes met for a brief second, grateful and surprised. She smiled as she sat down, and he nodded, returning to his corner by the window, gripping the cold pole with one hand as the bus jerked forward. He didn't think much of it. It was just the right thing to do. Something his mama raised him to do. But as the woman reached into her bag and scribbled something on a piece of paper, he noticed. Before getting off at her stop, she gently pressed the folded note into his hand. "You'll want to read this later," she said with a warm smile and stepped off the bus. Marcus opened it right there, and what he saw made his eyes go wide. Back, in the courtroom, Judge Harris tried to keep her voice steady. She glanced over at Deshawn again, wondering how much of that old boy was still inside the man before her. The prosecutor began speaking, laying out the evidence, but Monique's thoughts kept drifting to a time long gone. A summer afternoon, a shared ice cream cone, a promise made under a tree in the park. "You'll be someone important someday," Deshawn had said to her once. "Don't let the world change you." Had the world changed him? At that very moment, Marcus was still staring at the note on the bus, his hands trembling slightly. He had no idea that this piece of paper would open doors he didn't even know existed, connecting him to people and choices that would shape his future forever. That a simple act of kindness would turn into something life-altering. That the woman on the bus wasn't just any passenger, and that the note he held was more than just words. It was a key. Two stories, two people at the edge of unexpected turning points. One judge trying to make sense of the past, one teenager facing a future he never saw coming, and somewhere in between, fate was already moving the pieces. What happened next would challenge beliefs, test loyalties, and reveal truths that had been hidden for years. But for now, both stories hung in the balance. One verdict, one decision, one message, and the rest is just beginning. The note in Marcus's hand was short, no more than a sentence, but the words were strange, like they weren't meant to be read by just anyone. He read them again and again, thinking maybe he misunderstood. It said, "You don't know me, but I've been looking for you for a long time. Please call the number on the back. Your life is about to change." At first, Marcus thought it was some kind of scam. People passed out weird things in the city all the time, but the way the woman looked at him, like she really knew something he didn't, it felt different. He turned the note over. There, it was. A number, nothing else, no name, no company, just a number. He thought about tossing it, he really did. But something about it stuck with him. And that night, while lying in bed, staring at the ceiling in his small shared room with his younger brother snoring on the mattress below, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the note meant something. Maybe even something big. Across the city. Judge Harris sat alone in her chambers long after court had ended. The trial had been pushed to the next morning, giving her time to process, but it wasn't enough. Seeing Deshawn again after all these years had done something to her, brought up a version of herself she thought she'd left behind. The little girl with glasses and big dreams, the one who always felt like an outsider until Deshawn came along and made her feel like she mattered. She remembered the last time she saw him, barely 13, sitting on the stoop outside his building, staring at the ground. She'd waved, he didn't wave back. That was the day his family disappeared. Word got around later that there was some trouble. Drugs, money owed, a bad situation, but nobody really knew for sure. All Monique knew was that he was gone, and she never got a goodbye. Now here he was, charged with a string of crimes. His file painted a picture of a life gone wrong. A few stints in and out of juvenile detention, a brief attempt at a GED program, then nothing for years until now. But Monique knew better than to judge someone just by the papers in front of her. People were more complicated than that. Still, she couldn't get personally involved. That would go against everything she worked for. She was a judge. She had to stay impartial. But her heart remembered too much. Meanwhile, Marcus decided to take a chance. The next day after school, he found a quiet spot by the stairwell and dialed the number. It rang twice before a woman answered. Her voice was calm, but there was something urgent beneath the surface. "Is this Marcus?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yeah, who's this?" There was a pause, then she said, "I can't explain everything over the phone, but I knew your father, and he wanted you to have something important." Marcus blinked. "My father? I don't even know." "Him, I know," she said gently. "But you need to understand he made a choice that saved a lot of people. And it's time you knew the truth." Marcus leaned back against the wall, his heart pounding. Nobody ever talked about his dad. His mom shut down the moment his name came up. He barely knew anything, just that he was gone before Marcus turned 2. Every now and then he'd ask, but it always ended with silence or tears. So he stopped asking. But now, out of nowhere, some stranger was saying his dad had a story, one that mattered. "Are you messing with me?" Marcus asked, his voice a little shaky. "No," the woman said. "I'm not. I know this is a lot. But if you're willing, I'd like to meet. Somewhere safe, public. You don't have to come alone." Marcus didn't say yes. Not right away. But he didn't hang up either. Something about her tone. It wasn't fake. It wasn't salesy. It felt like truth, even if it was wrapped in mystery. He agreed to meet her the next day, at a bookstore cafe downtown. While Marcus wrestled with that decision, Monique spent her evening pulling old files. Off the record. Just for herself. She searched for Deshawn's name, trying to trace his life from where it left off. There were apps, years with no records. But in between the missing pages, a few things stood out. A group home, a fight, a release. Then silence. The more she read, the more questions she had. Why hadn't anyone helped him? Why had he slipped through the cracks? One document caught her attention, a police report from 5 years ago. It mentioned a robbery gone wrong, a name she didn't recognize, and an anonymous tip that led to arrests. Deshawn wasn't listed as a suspect, but there were rumors, and something about that tip didn't sit right. It felt too clean, too perfect, like someone wanted to erase a mess before it got too big. She printed it and tucked it into her folder. Not because it would help in the courtroom, but because something told her this wasn't just a criminal case. This was a story, one that hadn't been told properly, one that maybe she was meant to finish. The next morning, Marcus got to the cafe early. He sat near the window, trying to look like he belonged, even though he felt completely out of place. Every time the door opened, his heart jumped. Finally, she walked in. The woman from the bus. She was wearing a coat now, and her belly was bigger than he remembered, but she smiled the same way. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Marcus didn't know what to say. "Who are you?" She pulled something from her bag. A small envelope. She slid it across the table. "I promised your father I'd give this to you when the time was right," she said. "And I think it's time." Marcus stared at the envelope. His fingers didn't move. He wasn't sure he wanted to open it. Not yet. "Why now?" he asked. "Why after all this time?" She looked down, then back up at him. "Because the people who wanted to keep this quiet, they're not quiet anymore. And your name came up. I thought you should hear the truth before someone else tries to rewrite it." He looked at her closely now, realizing she was scared too. Whatever this was, it wasn't just some emotional moment. It was bigger. It involved more people, maybe danger, maybe secrets. And he was right in the middle of it without even knowing. He slid the envelope into his pocket. "I'll read it later," he said. She nodded. "Just be careful, Marcus. Not everyone wants this story to come out." And with that, she stood up and walked away. Back in the courthouse, Deshawn sat in his holding cell, staring at the wall. He knew the judge's face the moment he saw her. Monique, the girl with the big dreams and the soft eyes. He never thought he'd see her again, let alone like this. But life had a funny way of twisting paths. He wondered if she remembered him, really remembered, and if she did, what she thought now. Because what he was about to say in that courtroom wasn't just going to defend him, it was going to change everything. The next day in court, the tension was different, heavy, the kind that settled in everyone's bones before a word was even said. Judge Harris walked into the room with her usual grace, but her eyes scanned the courtroom quickly, landing once again on Deshawn. His face was unreadable, but his eyes met hers for just a second too long. Something unspoken passed between them, a kind of quiet understanding, or maybe a silent plea. Deshawn's lawyer, a young public defender named Olivia, stood ready with a folder under her arm and nerves in her throat. She had only just been assigned the case, but she'd already seen enough to know something wasn't adding up. The evidence was thin, the arrest report messy, and the witness statement felt forced. But what really caught her attention was how hard the prosecution was pushing for a deal. That didn't usually happen unless someone wanted to close the case, fast and quiet. Meanwhile, the prosecutor, Mr. Dalton, had a reputation for being sharp and relentless, but today, his energy seemed a little off. He kept glancing at Judge Harris like he was trying to guess how much she knew, or how much she remembered. It wasn't obvious, but Monique noticed. She didn't say anything, just made her notes, listened carefully, and watched everyone. When Deshawn finally stood to speak, Olivia nudged his arm gently. "Keep it simple, tell the truth." He nodded but didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked around the courtroom, like he was trying to figure out where to begin. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like someone who'd been running for too long and was tired of being hunted. "I didn't do what they said," he finally said, his voice steady but low. "But I know why they want me to take the fall, and I'm done being quiet about it." Gasps rose from the back of the room. The judge's gavel came down once, sharp and clean. "Order." But Deshawn didn't stop there. He looked directly at the prosecutor now. "You remember 2019, That warehouse job? You all pinned it on someone else, but I was there. I saw who made the call, and it wasn't me. It was someone working with the same badge as the people arresting me now. Dalton shifted in his seat, suddenly tense. Judge Harris narrowed her eyes but kept her face neutral. Back in another corner of the city, Marcus sat at the back of his school library, staring at the unopened envelope in his hand. He'd brought it with him, thinking maybe he'd finally read it during lunch. But every time he started to open it, something stopped him, like part of him was afraid that once he read it, nothing in his life would be the same again. He wasn't wrong. When he finally tore it open, his hands trembled. Inside was a letter, handwritten, and a photo, faded, with two people standing in front of a car. One of them was a man who looked a little like Marcus. Same eyes, same jaw. His father. The letter began with, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back." And that's when Marcus stopped breathing for a second. The words were real, too real. And as he kept reading, the story unfolded slowly. His father had once been an undercover informant for a group investigating corruption within local law enforcement. He had been gathering information on dirty officers, dirty deals, and quietly passing it to the right people. But something went wrong. Someone found out, and he disappeared. The letter didn't say exactly who was involved, but it gave names, hints, pieces of a puzzle that had never been put together. And right there at the bottom, one sentence stood out. "If something ever happens to me, look for Deshaun Walker. He'll know what to do." Marcus read that line over and over again. He didn't know this man, had never met him. But now he was connected to a trial, a judge, and secrets that were clearly still dangerous. He looked up Deshaun Walker on his phone. The first thing that popped up was a mugshot, then an article about the trial. His heart sank. That man sitting in court was the one his father trusted. Now everything felt connected in a way Marcus didn't understand. Why did the woman on the bus give him that note? How did she know his father, and why now? The next time he saw her, she was already waiting for him near the cafe. Her name was Claire. She explained that she used to work with Marcus's dad, quietly, behind the scenes, helping him gather info, passing notes, listening in on meetings when no one noticed her. She had left that world when things got too dangerous, especially after Marcus's dad vanished. But when she saw Marcus give up his seat on the bus, so selfless, just like his father had been, she knew she had to act. "There's more going on in that courtroom than you know," she told him. "And I think you might be the key to finishing what your father started." Marcus didn't know how to answer that. He was just a teenager. He had school, homework, a part-time job at a diner. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't brave like his dad must have been. But still, the letter, the names, the warning. Meanwhile, back in court, Deshaun's claims stirred something Judge Harris couldn't ignore. After the session ended, she called for a recess and returned to her chambers, locking the door behind her. She pulled out the printout from the night before, the police report from 2019. There was a name in there. Officer Trent Wallace, a name Deshaun had just hinted at, without saying. She remembered Trent. Used to be a detective, got promoted quickly, too quickly. She hadn't seen him in years. But the last time she did, he was investigating a case with multiple leads that suddenly went cold. Monique picked up her phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in a long time, her cousin Jamal, an investigative reporter known for getting into places he wasn't supposed to. "I need a favor," she said. "I'm working a case, but something stinks. You ever heard of Trent Wallace?" There was a pause. "You mean the guy who vanished right after being named in a corruption probe?" "Yeah, I've heard of him." "Why?" "He might not be as vanished as people think," Monique replied quietly. "And I think someone's trying to keep it that way." Now the threads were coming together, but nothing was clear yet. Only this: Deshaun wasn't lying. Marcus was sitting on a secret, and Judge Harris was getting closer to something that could bring down more than just a case. But with every step they took, the risk grew bigger, and none of them knew who was still watching from the shadows, or what would happen when the truth finally came to light.